My name is Tammy Medlin. I'm the local history librarian here at the Wilson County Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you to our interview with the Stantonsburg Historical Committee. We have Mr. Dooley Ezzard, Mayor Coley Rhodes, and Mr. Ed Bynum with us today, and they're going to talk about their plans for Stantonsburg Museum. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask the questions and let them decide which ones they want to answer, or who's going to answer which one. So, thank you all for coming today. Where did the idea of a museum in Stantonsburg originate? First question.
I believe it's been talked about for several years, but lately this is the first historical committee as such that the town has had, and we formed it this year, and it just has so much interest, and we're so excited that you have us on today so that we can share that interest with all the citizens and people who might have any information about our town. We have such a rich history. We have celebrated our bicentennial in 2017, and we have such a vibrant future that's to come. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Edwin, who is going to give us some background information.
Okay, my first recollection of it, there was a lot of talk in the late 60s, early 70s about the possible history museum being established in Stantonsburg. And the first concrete idea was to use the old railroad depot that was on the verge of being demolished. And before we got any further, it was demolished, so we lost out there. In contrast, both Elm City and Walstenburg were able to use their train depots, or railroad depots, for museums. And it further became of interest to people in the late 70s and early 80s when the idea was born to write a book on Stantonsburg history. It was at this time that the museum was discussed, and again, it didn't get any further. In the meantime, I think I'm correct, Mayor, that the town bought a building in town for the use of that, and again, that never materialized. And now, the fact that the town has purchased the old clinic, we have a new opportunity. They've agreed to donate us some space, and that's what we're working on right now.
It's very exciting that we have this new building with space, because our current town hall is very limited on space. So we're having a new section when you first walk in to the new town hall, that there'll be permanent display areas for lots of relics and things to remind us of the old-timey Stantonsburg.
This new town hall is located on the corner of Main Street and Tyson Drive, and it's going to be fabulous. It'll have the town hall, the police department, as well as our museum to display the artifacts that show the life of Stantonsburg.
Well, how did each of you, or how did one of you anyway, how did each of you become interested in the history of Stantonsburg?
I'd like to say that I was a choral teacher at Bentonville High School, and the Applewhite House, built by W.H. Applewhite III, was built in 1910, and it became available, and I purchased that house, not knowing what I was getting into. I discovered that Mr. Applewhite had the business, Applewhite and Company, on Main Street. We call it the Seal Building now because it's on the seal of all of our businesses, our trucks for the town of Stantonsburg. By buying that house, I became acquainted with Mr. Applewhite's son, Jim Bill Applewhite, who was quite a character, and I got to know him personally. Also, Mr. Applewhite's daughter was my backdoor neighbor, and her husband was Sam Tyson, who was a very prominent businessman and construction man there in Stantonsburg. And they talked to me so much about Stantonsburg and told me about the history, and I just became enthralled with the life of Stantonsburg through those wonderful people.
I'm originally from Stantonsburg and lived there most of my life, and just wanted to preserve the history that we have before all the history is gone. So we're real excited to start this. My father was the principal of the elementary school there, And I too purchased an older home there that was built in 1922, and just want to preserve everything good about the good old days.
I became interested, when the group was formed in the early eighties to write the Stantonsburg history.
And we have copies of that book.
Yes, somebody asked me about one the other day. I told him to go to the town office. He came back and told me that they had been sold out. So, do you know anything about the availability of any copies of it?
I do not know anything about the availability.
If you would check in on
I
it.
certainly will.
We have two in the local history collection that can be used here. They are not
Okay.
circulated, but we do have a copies that can be looked at here.
That's
Okay,
wonderful.
good,
That's great.
good. I have two, one feature my daughter, so, okay. But that was my first interest in it, and, being on the committee, I learned a lot.
Okay, well, what is one memory or special memory some of you have about growing up here? Growing up in Stantonsburg, if you did?
Well, I'd like to say I didn't grow up in Stantonsburg, but I raised my three sons. And it was just a fabulous experience. They had full run of the town, and this was in the 80s and 90s, and I never worried 1 minute about their safety. Maybe I wasn't a good parent, but they would play at the railroad tracks, put pennies on the track when the train would come over and flatten them. They would go to the drugstore run by Mr. Roland Strickland, and they would sit there and play cards and eat ice cream. And they'd play in the woods behind the school, and they would find fossils in the ditch behind the school. It was just a perfect place for children to grow up.
Yeah, and I grew up there in the 50s and 60s. Of course, I'm not that old. I can remember what people told me. But actually, it was great fun playing on the ditch bank. That's where everybody gathered. Everybody rode bikes everywhere. We played house under all the grapevines and all the made mud cakes and stuff like that on the ditch bank, and just had the best time. And there were no doors locked, and free reign of the town, and you just came home when you heard your mother call or when it was dark.
Okay, I remember, I won't give my age away, so, with the statement, a lot of children my age, when I was growing up, and we always played on the dirt, meaning non-paved streets. And as the mayor says, my mother would call out at 5 o'clock, Lone Ranger's on, that meant it's time for me to come home and watch the Lone Ranger on television. So we made good use of the dirt streets.
Well, I have a question. While you're researching the town history, what's the most interesting thing, item, event you have discovered so far that you didn't know about? The most interesting thing you found so far? I mean, and either one of you can answer that.
I'll just speak from my experience as a newcomer. I've only been there for 44 years. But I discovered that the town was amazingly vibrant. There was a movie theater, a funeral home, a fish market, a used car, brand new car dealership, 5 gas stations. It's incredible what was going on in that town.
2 grocery stores, and it was very active, and the drugstore was where everybody hung out because they had the ice cream and the good fountain drinks, the good fountain cokes with that crushed ice. It was just awesome, and all the kids would go there after school, and it was just a great place to be.
And as hot as it gets around here in the summertime, I can definitely understand that.
You needed something cold to drink and some ice cream to drip.
Yes.
One idea that stood out to me was that Stantonsburg was the first town incorporated. It's in Edgecombe County then, but now Wilson County, the first county. The first town that was incorporated in 1817. I think I have it correct. What stood out in Stantonsburg's early growth was its location. Back then, you had 2 modes of transportation: walking or getting on the creek and paddling. Stantonsburg is located on Contentney Creek, and I used to hear my grandfather talking about taking a barge and poling it down to Newbern, picking up fertilizer. He'd carry tar and pitch down there and come back with a load of fertilizer. And at one time, I think it was the Tarboro-Goldsboro Road came through Stantonsburg. And so the only two means of transportation back then. And Stantonsburg was on both.
Well, let me ask you, what is something, an event, a person, a place, an institution that y'all think should definitely be included in a museum, that you know you want to talk about in that museum?
To me, the coming of the railroad in 1907 was a big turning point. Stantonsburg was very vibrant back in the mid-1880s, but the railroad enabling the lumber company to come in, they had to ship the lumber out. It was a good way for fertilizers to come in for the farmers. So the fact that the railroad really opened Stantonsburg up. It was intended to go through Rocky Mount, but Dr. Crocker persuaded the railroad to remove it, bring it through Stantonsburg. I don't know how many people know that.
That's interesting.
It was supposed to parallel 264, but he coerced them to come from Bostonburg through Stantonsburg, which is paralleling after you swing out and coming back in Wilson.
I can't believe that, because I read somewhere he had like the first refrigerator, the first radio, the first phone, stuff like that. He was the first to do a lot of stuff.
He was very innovative in his time.
Well, if you think, the phone makes sense if you think he's the local doctor and people have to get in touch with him.
Mm-hmm. Good
And
point.
then, of course,
Good point.
he's
Good
also
point.
gonna understand what food going bad and stuff, people getting hold of that, so I can understand the refrigerator too.
Changes in communication
Mhm.
with the advent of the phone.
Well, to start out with, from what I read, he started with a horse and buggy, going house to house, so I can definitely understand that.
Personal note, my grandfather came to town. He was orphaned when he was 6 years old. Dr. Crocker was his uncle. In his teens, probably, he came as Dr. Crocker's stable boy. He would take care of his horses and hook them up to to his buggy so he could go on calls. So
Oh, man.
that accounts for the reason I'm here.
That's good. Oh,
Well,
wow.
I'd like to mention the one, well, I
Go ahead.
didn't want to interrupt you, but
No,
I was
go
in, W.H. Applewhite, as I referred to, I live in his house and I feel like I'm personally acquainted with him. He died in my house, his wife died in my house, Ophelia Barnes Applewhite. And he's from a line of settlers of Stantonsburg. He was the third. And the original Applewhite house is out on Highway 58, just outside of Stantonsburg, and they had a plantation. And I would like to mention that the agriculture was the formation or the basis for Stantonsburg to begin with, and the slaves made that possible. And I am so interested in appreciating and knowing what went on these plantations, because we have several large plantations right around Stantonsburg. And the original Applewhite house was home to several slaves, and I think we can find that on Lisa Henderson's website. What is it called?
Black, White, Awake.
It's an awesome website about African American culture in the Stantonsburg and Wilson County area. But the Applewhites continued with their land ownership through the generations, but they never sought to really expand. And I've read some of James Applewhite's material, which was Mr. Applewhite's grandson, and he talks about they lived, even in the 40s and 50s, they still had wood stove to cook with in my house, and he had the building and the dry goods store, which was like a Walmart in those days. And that was a very important hub of activity. And I think that Applewhite store and all the information we can get from that would be really important in this museum.
Did he own the whole, what we call the Seal building? Was that store take up the whole
He
building?
had a company, you can correct me, Mr. Bynum, he had a company with Mr. Rogers and himself. And eventually he sold out his part.
Okay, but they own that whole block?
Practically,
Okay.
you know.
Now, what type of items are you looking for? Would you be looking for people to donate? Are we talking photographs, letters? What are we talking about?
Well, we sent a letter through Mayor Coley Rhodes to the citizens of Stantonsburg and asked them for photographs of individuals, families, and groups, such as baseball teams. Mr. Bynum has told me about baseball teams and where they actually played. We had African-American teams, and didn't we have a white team as well? And also teams for the schools. We had African-American schools and Wilson Public Schools, Wilson County Public Schools. Love to have pictures of these kids, of these teams, of pastors and churches in the area. We would like to have pictures of farm workers, anything that shows the life, a snapshot of life in Stantonsburg over any decade. We'd like to have artifacts such as tools or clothing. Mr. Bynum has a little teeny shirt that he got from Stantonsburg Elementary School. What does it say on the front?
Stantonsburg School.
And
That's it.
he still got that little shirt. And those kinds of things make history come alive because it's what people valued in their lives. Also, we call them American Indians, indigenous Americans, lived all in that area. And there are lots of artifacts that are available. In fact, we have a friend, Mr. Deans, who has volunteered to donate some of his important Indian artifacts to this museum to show what life was like even before the Europeans came over. And also there are fossils. We mentioned the ditch behind the school. There are tons of fossils that are millions and millions of years old. They need to be represented. Also personal letters of communication from like World War I, World War II between citizens who were serving. During the Depression is an important part of our history. Any kind of personal communications or letters. We would like to have pictures of the homes, the businesses, the schools, the churches, and any other landmark. For instance, we had a big sawmill operating in Stantonsburg, and we have a great picture of that from an aerial view that we're going to display. And you may have other things you think we need to put in there.
And other pictures of the mill, because Ms. Annie Artis is also on this historical committee, as well as Walt Bynum, Tommy Shingleton, and Tommy Stanton, who his relatives are who the town was named for. And Annie's parents worked at the mill, so that was a big thing back in the day. So if you have any pictures of that would be great too.
Or the box factory that was there by the railroad that I've heard about. And there was African-American schools. There was an early one right where our town park is now. There was an African-American school, and I believe Rosenwald School.
Yes.
And it burned, if I'm not mistaken.
In the latter years, I did not keep up with it. I knew it was inactive and probably some people lived in it or rented spaces, but I think it did eventually burn. I don't think it was arson.
But any kind of pictures like that would be really valuable to what we're trying to do to show life in Stantonsburg.
Now, how will the exhibit work? Will it be permanent or will it rotate?
Well, it'll be permanent because we have this area in our new town hall coming up with glassed-in cases that some permanent things will be there, forever to establish, the basis. But if people want to donate things and you'd like to donate it for a short period of time, we can accommodate that. If you have things of value or pictures of value that you don't want to get rid of, we will certainly copy, make copies of those so you can retain the originals so that we can have that represented. And then if you just want to lend some things for a period of time, we'll establish an area where you can do that as well. And it'll all be done through the town office with the town administration. And that is currently at 105 Commercial Avenue, but our new address will be 312 Main Street.
Do you know when the new town hall will be open?
Yes, we're hoping before the end of this year.
Oh,
Okay.
man.
Yes.
I would like to mention the phone number for the town hall.
Yes.
If people are interested in making donations or inquiring further, it's 252-238-3608. And any of the people that answer the phone will know what to do and how to direct you to one of us for procuring some of those artifacts.
Well, I'm not from Stantonsburg, I'm from Nash County, but I remember you called me about something about an encampment, and we found some information on a mule, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
The Yankees came and stole the gentleman's mule, or confiscated the gentleman's
That's
mule.
right.
And we found information on that. So you can find all kinds of stuff you didn't know that nobody knew, and that's half the fun of it, is finding stuff people didn't know.
And that was on the, mentioned Mr. Tommy Stanton. It was his great-great-great-grandfather's plantation or house. It wasn't really a big plantation.
Yeah,
Where they took the mule because they wanted it for the troops.
and then made one of the, young African Americans write it down, I think to Kinley or Kinston, and then he had to make his own way back.
That's right. Had to walk
So,
back.
you know, and he didn't wanna do it because I remember he got thrown off the mule a couple of times, or fell off the mule a couple of times, and they still made him ride it.
Wow.
We also
That's
had
fun.
a Revolutionary War skirmish
Mm-hmm.
with Tarleton, the British guy,
Correct.
came up, and it's right on the outskirts of Stantonsburg, and it's really
There's
interesting.
a historical marker there
Yes, there is.
in honor
Oh,
of
sure
that.
is.
And I mentioned Mr. Dean's, but there are some artifacts that he and some others have that came from that battle. And it's really they did some metal detecting in a secret place, and it's really interesting.
Okay, well, it sounds like a big project, and it sounds like a one that's gonna do really well for the town, and something that a lot of people are gonna be interested in. Hopefully, we can get you some donations today, and I'd like to thank you all for coming.
Well, thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us, and we just encourage anybody in and around Stantonsburg with any connections to that to help us out, because it's a lot of fun to get together and do it, and this is a community project, and we want everybody's input.
That's right.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I'd like to mention,
Well said.
excuse me, I'd like to mention a big thanks to Ms. Medlin for caring about history. That's your main love anyway.
I am the local history
And
librarian.
she is so helpful and encouraging for us in this historical prospect.
Well, part of that is I got interested in it because Ms. Eartha Butler, who is your librarian now, used to work here.
Oh, yes.
So that's how I got into that.
She's great.
She is great.
Thank
great.
you,
So
thank
stop
you
by.
for letting us borrow her.
Well, I just want everybody to stop in and say hello to Eartha and meet her, and you've got a great little library. You
It's
really do,
wonderful.
and it's in a good location, it's nice, and of course Eartha is great. She's the one who helped me get used to this place when I first started back in 2019. So y'all got very lucky with her.
She's also on our town board, I think.
Yes.
She is.
Do you remember
She's
the
a-
name of the library?
Crocker,
Correct. And I-
Samuel H.
and
Crocker.
I think the property was given by his family on which the building was built.
Yeah, it's Dr. Samuel H. Crocker,
Yes.
He was an important citizen.
yes. Okay, well, thank you for coming today, and thank you for joining us with our interview with the Stantonsburg Historical Committee.